Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Jim Beddix. I'm the director of our server and storage engineering here at IntegraONE, and my co-presenter today on the Veeam DataLabs topic is Eric Doherty from Veeam Software. So Eric, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Jim. I am a channel SE. My fancy title is Technical Partner Manager, but I work with folks like Jim to help get the word out about Veeam products and to help educate his team to help educate the customers on what our product can do beyond our basic backup features, which is what we're going to discuss today.
Great. Thanks, Eric. So that leads us into our agenda. As we briefly discussed already, we're going to look at Veeam DataLabs, which extends the feature set from Veeam outside of just the traditional backup and replication that most people are familiar with. We actually have a lot of content today that we're going to go through. Hopefully, we should still have some time at the end for questions. If you do have any questions as we go along, go ahead and put them in the questions box. We'll do our best to answer them at the end, but if we do run short on time, we'll make sure we get back to you with a direct response shortly after the webinar wraps up for today. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to talk about going beyond your backup and availability today using Veeam DataLabs. And just to set the table on why this is important, a little background here. I'm sure this is nothing new to anyone, but obviously the IT landscape is changing as far as data is concerned. Data and systems are becoming much more critical. We live in that 24/7 world now. Downtime is not acceptable. And at the same time, we're growing data at a very rapid rate, exponential rate, really. So it's being more data that we have to back up, more systems that we have to maintain, and we have to keep them up at a higher level of availability. And then the third thing that's happening is those systems are now moving outside of our four walls, right? So we might have public and private or hybrid cloud deployments, which makes the challenge of keeping that data online and dealing with that growth even tougher. So to deal with some of that, we need to introduce some intelligent data management. If you look at sort of the 5 stages of intelligent data management, where Veeam DataLabs sits is right at stage 3. So stage 1, backing up your data, everybody's familiar with that. We know we need to take some backup copies. We have to have the data protected. Stage 2 is really gaining some visibility into both the backup data as a whole, especially if it crosses outside of the data center into cloud, and the infrastructure required to run the backups. It's really designed to move you from being a more reactive, I need to restore from an issue, to being more proactive, how do I avoid that downtime? And stage 3, where DataLabs sits, the activation stage, is really about gleaming some actual business data intelligence off of that backup data to give us a little bit more value. Okay. If you look at things, traditionally, backup is seen by most organizations as something they have to do. It's data that's parked out there, it's useless, we just need to store it forever. But in reality, there's a virtual goldmine of data sitting in those backups. Data that you can act upon, data that you can use for business intelligence and for testing purposes, and most people don't realize that. If we take a look at some of the availability challenges we have today, your data center needs to have changes. We have patches, we have application updates that come out, but every time we need to apply those things, we have the risk of some downtime. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, in the 24/7 world, downtime is just something that really isn't acceptable. In more rigid environments, we also usually have a formal change control process. And in part of that change control, you're also going to have a backup plan. If you try to apply that patch or install that update and it doesn't go right or it's taking too long, the organization's going to want to know, when do we do the rollback and what does that rollback look like? Many times those backup plans are actually much more complicated and take a lot longer than the anticipated patch or update will be. And finally, no matter how many white papers and release notes you read, when you actually go and implement that change or that update in your environment, you really don't know what is going to happen until it actually goes live in your environment, because your environment is different from everyone else's.
Jim?
So yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. These slides are not changing on the screen.
Oh, I apologize for that. I see that. How
There
about
we go.
now? All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
I apologize for that. Thanks, Eric, for letting me know.
You're welcome.
So picking up where we left off then. So we're going to actually take a look at what is leverage data. And leverage data is really taking advantage of the data that you have in your existing backups or replicas that you've taken and using that data to mitigate some of those availability risks. So what if we could actually start this data up as if it was production, because basically it is a copy of your production environment, apply that patch and test it, or apply that update and test it. Those are some of the things that we can actually do inside of Veeam DataLabs. And the really cool part about this is Veeam has had this around for a number of years, and many customers don't even know that it actually is in the license that they already own. So if we take a look at the history of leverage data that Veeam has had, we go all the way back to version 5. We could actually do this from a backup file. In version 8, you could leverage your replicated VMs. You could also leverage storage snapshots integrated right with your storage provider. And now new in version 9.5 with update 4, we have 2 new technologies called Secure Restore and Stage Restore, which Eric's going to talk about a little bit later. So what is DataLabs? It's a collection of technologies that allows you to test those workloads, updates, patches, security vulnerabilities, and actually make sure that when you go to apply these updates or these checks in your environment, they're going to work. So some of the features that were already in the product were Demand Sandbox, Sure Backup, and Sure Replica. And like I mentioned before, the new features, Stage Restore and Secure Restore. If we take those features and we apply them to actual business use cases, what can we actually do with those feature sets? So we can improve your backup efficiencies. We can improve some of your IT services or dev apps. You can look at it from a security and forensics perspective or ensure compliance. So digging a little deeper on each of those topics, improving your backup and replication operational efficiencies, we can ensure that the copy of your data, your backup job that you took, is reliable when you actually need it. So everyone takes your backups. You get a log that says your backup completed successfully at night. Everyone goes to bed, thinks everything is fine. But what happens when you actually need to do a restore? Or you need to actually power on a replica? What if someone made a change along the way to something like a boot file? A patch or a manual update was done, and now the system hasn't been restarted. Your backups continue to run every night. You get a successful backup, but now something happens and you actually need to reboot the machine. When you do that reboot, that boot file change renders the machine useless. It can't boot up. You're wondering, well, I'll just go and restore from my latest backup. Well, when was that change made? You don't know. So with technologies like Sure Backup, we can actually power on that virtual machine. It will actually simulate or boot that machine for real. And you'll see right away that that backup really is not good. While you have a good copy of the data, the machine itself wasn't usable because of that change that was made to the boot file. You can correct the issue right away. And instead of waiting for when you actually need it and you're under the gun, you know that the fix is in and the backups are actually good. So the 2 technologies that we're looking at there, be Sure Backup and Sure Replica. These have been in the product for a number of years. As long as you have the Enterprise Edition or higher Veeam, you actually have access to those features today. You just have to configure them. So Sure Backup is designed specifically around testing those backup jobs, where Sure Replica is the exact same thing, but for your replication jobs. So kind of taking a little bit more of a deeper dive into here, what does this actually look like? So you've got some production virtual machines running on your production storage. You're backing those up with Veeam off to some sort of backup storage where it's being compressed and deduplicated. With Sure Backup, we can actually go ahead and use the vPower portion of Veeam to power on directly from the backup storage, that backup file, that backup VM, and put it in an isolated bubble, a virtual lab, if you will. And you can have more than one virtual machine in here in the lab, so you can test systems together if you need to. Once that machine is powered on, the Sure Backup job will make sure that the VM is good, that the OS booted, and you can actually even check to make sure that your application's running, the ports are available, and everything that you would expect out of a restore job, should something bad happen, is working as expected. You'll then get an email of that report showing you that your backup job not only completed, but that VM is recoverable. And the exact same thing is good here for both backups and for replicas. Taking a closer look at how this can help for IT services or DevOps. We can use the on-demand sandbox feature. The on-demand sandbox is basically leveraging that virtual lab, but using either direct off the backup storage or preferred a storage snapshot to go ahead and mount those backups. And remember, those are basically exact copies of your production environment, which means when you deploy those in the virtual sandbox, you can test those application changes, test those patches, and make sure they're going to actually work against your production environment without having to bother the SAN administrator to do a clone or a snapshot on your production SAN or spin up any other environment. It's all self-contained within Veeam. This also helps from a patching perspective. You know, every month when those patches come out, I get a lot of people that are concerned. They don't want to apply the Microsoft patches right away on Patch Tuesday. They're always worried something bad's going to happen. Here again, using the on-demand sandbox, you can apply those patches, reboot those machines, check and make sure that there's no harm done, and then go ahead and roll those patches up into your production environment, knowing that they're going to work as expected. So on-demand sandbox, it's a production environment that's basically isolated in a sandbox for you. It allows you to start those copies of production at any time for any testing that you want to do. You can also use it to train people on those systems or to troubleshoot if there's any issues. So because it's an exact copy of your environment, it's exactly what you would see in production. Leveraging storage snapshots with the virtual sandbox or on-demand sandbox is actually the best way to do it. And Veeam has a lot of interaction with the storage partners. At IntegraONE, we specifically would call out the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, which Nimble Storage is now part of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, as well as NetApp. Those are the storage partners that we work with. But there's many others on there, as you can see. Veeam works with pretty much everyone. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he'll pick up for the security and forensics portion.
Great, thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's kind of funny because you wouldn't really think when you think backup and recovery, you don't think security and forensics, but here we are. So if you can go ahead and click to the next slide. Some interesting use cases that we now have thanks to our DataLabs capabilities. We have the ability to do that application vulnerability testing and forensic testing within the DataLabs. So you can bring up that isolated environment and test ahead of time, again, like we said, with the patches. And I'm going to show you some cool things in a little while that are going to give you an opportunity to see what happens when you can run new antivirus definitions against old data during recovery, and some of the ways that security professionals can leverage that information to learn more about an environment or about a breach in general. So first thing that everybody always has on their mind and everything's out there is malware testing, virus testing. It's prevalent. There's nothing we can do. Case in point, more data stolen in the first half of 2017 than in all of 2016. If you look at these records, then that number is not going down as fast as IT departments are becoming more aware and finding ways of protecting themselves. The bad guys are finding new ways to exploit. And unfortunately, you can't get rid of the number one exploited hole in your environment, and that's the people that work in it. So as long as there's people, there's going to be issues. It's if you look at a survey from ESG, 70% of the customers are worried about contamination within their backups. If your production environment ever has an issue, your backups are going to have an issue. There's just no way around it. And if you think about how long a risk can lay latent on a network and a breach can happen before it's detected, there's no way that there's not bad data and malicious data in those backups. So what are you supposed to do about it? Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So we can do malware testing and antivirus testing before anything is ever restored to a production environment using our new technology that we've added to DataLabs with 9.5 update 4 of Veeam Availability Suite called Secure Restore. So what happens is while the backups are happening, I apologize, while the restores are happening, we have the option to scan with antivirus software the data that's being restored. So that would be a volume or an entire VM leveraging current antivirus software. So it leverages the software that the customers are already using. So that could be, we work natively with Windows Defender, ESET, Symantec, or anything with a command line support. So there's a nice little box that allows you to write in for a command line script to scan a server. So once you know that that's done, once you do that, you don't want to do it every time, but if you think about it, how nice is it to be able to scan 6-month-old data with today's backup virus stuff or today's virus definitions as you're doing a restore and know that there's not issues. It's going to add a little time to the restore, but it's going to add a lot of peace of mind as well. So the process for a secure restore is first, we select the restore point and we're going to scan it. So as part of the restore wizard within our Veeam products, you select to do the secure restore. So it mounts it directly to our mount server, which is part of the technology of Veeam Backup and Replication. And it triggers the antivirus check that you requested to happen and does it thoroughly. So you have a few options here. Now, if there's no infections found, go ahead and restore it back into your production environment. If there is an infection found, you can proceed to put it back online, but with no network adapters. Now, what's cool about that is that you have the ability to set that up if you have a forensics network or an isolated network where you can put your deeper forensics tools and security tools to work against it and learn more about what that infection is. So you know before it ever hits a network that it's infected. Now your security professionals have a way to work with a known bad piece of virtual machine that's going to give them the ability to learn more about some of these attacks that are happening. Or you have the option, if you don't want to have that risk, just abort the process altogether and don't restore that and tell people, sorry, it's bad, we're not going to put it back on our network. So the other side of that, and this is a little more regulatory, less scary, GDPR. So it's the 4 letters that most people don't know what it stands for. Obviously, it's right there on the screen, which is awesome, but everybody knows what it is. GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, it's something new in Europe. It's just been in place for about a year. And as you can see here, it's also known kind of as the nickname, the right to be forgotten. So people have the right to say, remove my data from your database. So it's much stronger. Think about how many times you click unsubscribe and it doesn't work. Under GDPR, unsubscribe better work or the company's going to get fined. It's kind of the theory there. But as you can see, in a year from that prior slide, it jumped up to number 2 on people's concerns list ahead of a lot of other well-known regulatory bodies. So it's something that everybody's talking about. So even if you're not in Europe, if you do business in Europe, it's coming up in California. There's been legislation to bring on a GDPR-like requirement. And we all know that once things happen like that in California, it kind of sweeps west to east across the country, and pretty soon it's just something, we'll all be under GDPR. So we're prepared as a company for that to happen. We're already obviously taking care of it in Europe, but we're ready for it to happen, and we're going to show you a little bit about how that happens. So again, the big thing with the regulations is if there's no hand slap, then it's not much of anything. So there's a cost to it. So those data breaches, that information getting out there. So not only having the data out there, now you have data out there that's not even supposed to be in your systems, you're going to get hit even harder. It's not even just the breach so much as it is the penalties for learning that data is in there that should not be. It's significant. So if you're talking thousands or millions of records, it could be crippling to a company to not be in compliance. So what do we want to do? We want to be able to look at that data to evaluate, are we compliant? And not only that, but be compliant while we're doing a restore process. If we need to restore information, we want to know while we're doing it and prior to bringing it back online in a production environment, that that data set meets our requirements of today. So what we use is a new technology that we've put into DataLabs called Staged Restore. So it allows us to maintain compliance by removing the data from the backups before it ever hits your production environment, and to quickly migrate those updated VMs into production as all part of one step, one process, and also give reports that show that we are staying in compliance. So an example of how this works is our friend John Smith, interested in buying a house in October 2017, registers details into the construction company database. So he goes ahead and signs up for something. They take a backup of that data, daily, hourly, nightly, whatever the case may be. The backup job is verified using Sure Backup, like we talked about before. You want to know 100% that that data is going to work when time comes. And something happens in production, and we need to recover that data. So for staged restore, let's say that in October, John Smith registered. In November, he decided to have his name taken. He bought a house already, so now he doesn't need that information in there. So he acts on his right to be forgotten by this company. So then we power on that machine in an isolated lab, and we can inject a script to make sure that John Smith's information is no longer in that database. So it's going to mount the server, mount the database, and these scripts are things that probably your DBAs already have, or that can be easily created to pull out that information, because you're not going to be pulling out just one name. This case, we're talking about one name, but you could possibly be, depending on the size of the companies, be pulling out thousands of names. And again, each one of those not caught is a hefty fine, so you want to make sure that that is caught. And once we've confirmed that that data is out of the database, we can go ahead and restore that into production, and know that instead of putting it into production and then running the scripts and having that gap where we could be out of compliance, we know that we're in compliance from the minute we hit production. So how does DataLabs as a technology stack up against our competition? Well, let's take a look. So, of course, this is, I'm from Veeam, and this is a Veeam related webinar, so we're going to look a lot better than everyone else. But if you look at the differentiators, if you look at the legacy backup solutions, those technologies don't necessarily exist, or at least they don't exist in an automated fashion. A lot of times something third party or something manual is required. But if you look at even some of the more modern ones, the capabilities are more manual, and some intervention from the backup administrators is going to be needed for it to work, or you're going to need to buy additional software. With Veeam, this is all included, like we said, in our base solution. And actually, if we click to the next slide, I think I'll even be able to show you which additions each feature is available in. So if you look at these features, most folks end up on our enterprise edition of our software, which means you have everything except the storage snapshots in DataLabs available to you. If you are integrating directly with a storage platform, you're going to want to be on Enterprise Plus, and probably already are, so that you can do your backups and restores directly to your data, to your SAN arrays. But for most folks within enterprise, if you look at this, you already have these features, or that's the version that you would want to get in order to get these features. We kind of call at Veeam, we call DataLabs our best kept secret, because everybody owns it and nobody's not nobody, but not enough people are utilizing it. And in some cases, they're looking for other solutions to accomplish things like we've just shown today, when they already have all these things.
Great, thanks, Eric. So like I said, we went over a lot of information today. We went at a pretty quick pace. I apologize for the beginning issue there with the slides not changing, but hopefully we got enough info from the remainder that it was valuable. In case you have any questions, you want to dig a little bit deeper, we'll open it up that you can actually start typing questions into the questions panel right now. And in the meantime, I just wanted to make you aware we do have an upcoming event down in King of Prussia on June 26th. It's our Hackathon 2.0 event. This is a follow-on to an event that we did last year. And Veeam is actually going to be presenting at this event as well. So if you have any questions related to the topics we discussed today around Data Labs or any other Veeam topic, or you're interested in the hackathon itself, please go to our website and sign up. The information is here, but it's also online.
Just for a little addition there from part of our presentation, we'll be doing a live, obviously isolated in a lab, a live ransomware attack and recovery demonstration.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And again, if there are any questions, now's the time to ask those. I'm going to go ahead to the last slide here, and I know that we did offer up, I believe there's a Starbucks gift card for attending the webinar today. There'll be a short survey that's sent out later today. Answering that survey will in turn get you the eligibility to receive the gift card. So I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes left here at the end if there's any questions. And if I don't see any questions here in a minute or two, we'll go ahead and we'll end the recording. But again, if anything does come up, feel free to reach out to your account rep or sign up for the live event. I think it's going to be very exciting. The first one we did got extremely positive feedback, and I'm sure the second one will as well. So. All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and we'll end the webinar here, and the recording should be posted to our website shortly. So thank you all for your time, and hopefully everybody has a great weekend. And Eric, again, thanks as always.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye-bye.